Hi, everyone, and welcome to Let's Talk Risk, where our goal is to engage, inspire, and empower the global community of risk practitioners. I'm your host, Naveen Agarwal, and today I'm really thrilled to welcome my guest, Kevin Schawinski. He is the co founder and CEO of Modulus, and he's also a member of the EU Task Force on General Purpose AI Code Practice Working Group. So he is in the middle of this from regulatory point of view, from a solutions development point of view. And I can't wait to have this conversation with him about this very fast moving space. With that, Kevin, welcome to the show. How are you today?
It's a real pleasure to be here today.
So Kevin, on your LinkedIn profile, you share that you are an astrophysicist who has turned into an AI entrepreneur. Tell us a little bit more about your journey and maybe reflect on a couple of key interesting moments in your journey that have led to this place.
Yeah, so I was an astrophysicist. I studied distant supermassive black holes and galaxies, and I would do that with telescopes around the world, in Hawaii, in Chile, but also in space. And so I would collect all these different types of data and try to understand and piece together how the universe works. And now about 10 years ago, I really got interested in machine learning as a tool to better understand the data that I was getting. And I got so interested and fascinated by the technology that I actually was more interested in the technology and its potential than the astrophysics. And so I decided to leave academia and start a company and focus on responsible and trustworthy AI. So on how to make better, safer, fairer AI systems so that they would find broader acceptance and success in the market. And then now, almost 4 years ago, we discovered this effort by the European Union to regulate AI. And I put AI in quotation marks here because even what even is AI from a legal perspective is a very interesting question. And we try to understand, well, what would this mean if a law like this actually became a reality? And we sort of tried to project it forward and realized that they proposed a very radical change to the way we use technology, comparable maybe only to privacy, what we did with GDPR, affecting essentially systems worldwide, not just in Europe. And one of the most interesting things I learned very early on is that the spiritual ancestor of the EU AI Act, and this is not a well-known fact, but you can look it up, is actually the medical device regulation.
Interesting.
Very similar structure.
Yeah. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. But, what I want to share with my audience today, Kevin, that, first I heard you on a podcast a few months back. And what really fascinated me was not only your deep technical knowledge, but also a very solid understanding of this rapidly moving regulatory space. But most importantly, you are able to talk about it in a way that people who are not so deep can understand. And this is going to be a fascinating discussion today, guys. So if you're joining just now, my guest today is Kevin Schawinski. We're going to talk about the EU AI Act and other regulatory stuff and what we can do as practitioners. So keep your questions and comments coming in the LinkedIn chat window, and I'll bring them into our discussion as much as possible. So, Kevin, let's start with that comment you just made, that the spiritual ancestor is the MDR Act, right? So tell us a little bit more about that. How do these two relate to each other?
So the way they relate to each other is that MDR is fundamentally a product liability regime, product safety. What do I need to do in order to put a medical device on the market? And then you have risk tiering. How risky is the product? If the risk is higher, then you have more things you need to do to satisfy those requirements. Put a CE mark on your product and put it on the market. And the EU AI Act is basically the same thing. It's a product liability, product safety regime with risk tiering. And in order to put the high-risk AI applications on the market, you need a CE mark. So fundamentally, they're actually very similar in spirit. And what's really fascinating is that now other countries, other organizations are also, of course, keen to regulate AI. And they're taking this framing, product liability with risk tiering, as, well, the obvious way to regulate AI. And I'm actually not sure this is true, but this is the regime we now have. If you're familiar with MDR, if you know how medical devices are put on the market, the AI Act is no stranger to you.
Oh, that's going to be a great news for a lot of folks in my audience who are really quite knee deep into the MDR. So, Kevin, I would like to start with like a 30,000 foot level overview of what's happening in the regulatory world? We know EU AI Act and we know things are happening in the US, but can you bring us up to speed? What's happening in these two major geographies?
So let's start in Europe. The AI Act was passed and became law almost a year ago, and various efforts are now underway. The first deadline is just in a few days on the 2nd of August this year, mostly affecting the big model providers. And the major deadline of the EU AI Act is on the 2nd of August next year, by when most of the high-risk applications actually have to have their CE mark simply to be placed on the market. And most companies are just not ready for that. So there was a big push led by industry, led by various interest groups to try and delay the EU AI Act by 1 or 2 years. And this failed. This failed pretty decisively. And so now the timeline, even if you wanted to push for a delay, is basically running out. There's almost no time left to affect this. So organizations who think they might be affected by the AI Act, now you just have just over a year to complete the process. So that's on the side of Europe. In the United States, we had an equally fascinating process because as part of the budget bill that just passed, there was a push to prevent the US states from passing their own AI laws. So actually, several US states have AI laws, particularly California, of course, but also Colorado, Texas, and a few others. And there was an attempt to stop that because the US, does it really need 50 different AI laws? Probably not. This moratorium was put in the bill, and then it came up for a vote in the Senate, and it was defeated 99-1. So now US states are free to pass their own AI laws, which of course turned the effort around because now particularly the tech industry is looking at this and saying, we don't want to have to deal with those 50 different state laws. Let's at least pass a US AI Act. And that's now being pitched, written, drafted, and I expect to see it sooner rather than later in the halls of Congress.
So it looks like two very different approaches from the industry, but the bottom line is clear that it's inevitable that we will have regulation and we will have laws about AI. Now, having said that, let's talk about the medical device industry because that's where our audience is coming from. Would you say that since there is some similarities, risk-based approach in the two regulations, that if we are sort of familiar and used to the EU MDR, we might have a slightly better time or easier time with the EU AI Act, or is there something in there that will still be problematic for us?
I think as a general rule, the medical device industry is very well prepared for the AI Act. Yes, it's an additional burden. It's an additional set of requirements, but you're familiar with how these work. You're familiar with the terminology and the processes that you need to put in place to meet them. So I'm not at all concerned talking to people from the medical device industry. It's really when you get to people outside, to regular software engineers, when you tell them about a quality management system or a risk management system, their eyes widen, they go, what on earth is that? And I have to do all this? This is impossible. Of course, if you build medical devices for a living, you say, well, I know what those things are. I know exactly how to handle them.
Nice. Kevin, it's very nice to hear that from someone like you because those of us who are so close to the industry and we have worked for so long, all we see are problems. We are not doing risk management right. We're not doing quality management right. We're just checking the box. But this perspective is so refreshing that at least we have the practice. We have the systems in place. Okay, so let's talk a little bit more in detail on that. There are standards on the AI side, right? ISO 42001, I believe, that talks about risk management, quality management. Can you help us understand just high level what that's about?
So 42001 is the ISO standard for an AI management system. I believe it is poised to be the standard that industry will adopt. And I mean that horizontally. So just as a medical device company might look at 42001 and put it as part of their ISO standard program, software companies making social media platforms and loan approval programs similarly will employ the same standard. It's completely horizontal. It has no vertical direction specificity whatsoever. It basically tells you how to build a management system and operate it. And I see that as the baseline layer for any company using AI going forward. And when I talk to colleagues in the audit industry, they see 42001 becoming basically as important as the 27001 for information security.
So is there a parallel here? Because in our world, we follow ISO 13485, which is the quality management system standard. And it came out essentially based on ISO 9001, which is more of a horizontal quality management standard. 13485 just makes it specific to medical devices. Am I seeing a little bit of a parallel there? Do you feel like there might be more specific, industry-specific AI standards coming off of 42001? Or how's that going to work? Just we are speculating right now.
We're completely speculating. For the time being, no. There's no equivalent sort of more vertical AI standard being developed at a serious level for verticals, at least at the international technical standards level. I think that will come. But my suspicion, again, I'm speculating here, is people first want to see the experience with 42001 and with the AI Act, and then sort of maybe even as an industry get together and say, well, here are our best practices, let's codify them.
So here I'm going to invite some comments from our audience today. A lot of you are involved, I know, on the standards committee in our medical device world. What are you guys seeing? Are you seeing any attempt to integrate these AI requirements or best practices with our 13485 or ISO 14971? What are you seeing? And where do you think this field is going? So let's have a good conversation about that. So we have our comment here, first comment from Raymond. Kevin, let's address that. Whether we are compelled by law or not, manufacturers have a duty of care, obligation to use AI responsibly and in such a way not to cause harm to their customers or broader to their stakeholders. I think ISO 42001 might be the means by which organizations will do this, but sadly, many will not if they are not regulated to do so. Let's talk about this whole notion of responsible AI deployment. What does that mean, Kevin, in your mind? And maybe how should we be thinking about that? That's such a broad term.
It's a broad term, and it's a term with some historical baggage because it goes back to the concepts of responsible and trustworthy AI, which were talked about maybe even 5 years ago as principles that should be embraced first voluntarily and then maybe through the force of law, which is essentially the origin of the EU AI Act. The idea of responsible and trustworthy AI is, if you want to really boil it down, to building reliable, safe products that have been tested, that had their risks analyzed, cataloged, and mitigated. So again, this is not at all strange for your audience. They've been doing this all along on the hardware and software side. And so when we say AI should be responsible in the medical device industry, it simply means that if AI is part of your product, you should apply the same care and the same processes or similar processes in order to make sure your product is safe, reliable, and trustworthy for the customer.
Yeah, and I see this becoming a pretty significant area of focus for us because, as you may be aware, FDA has cleared or approved, I think, over 1,200, according to their most recent list, over 1,200 AI ML-enabled devices, and they are responding to the fast-changing environment by creating regulatory pathways like PCCP, which is Predetermined Change Control Plan. So we are definitely, to your point, I think industry is used to working with AI devices and integrating them within or developing them within the current framework. To what extent do we need to change? I think that'll be an interesting point to discuss. And guys, I know all of you have a lot of ideas and experience about this, so I would love for you to keep sharing your comments. Thank you for that, Kevin. I do have a comment here with Phil. I agree with the concept of the US developing a united standard rather than by various states. Does Kevin believe the US and EU should partner on this task? Funny, we were talking about this a little bit. Can you read the tea leaves and tell us whether there might be some harmonization between the two laws that are going to be on the books?
So the de facto harmonization is ISO 42001 because it's the international standard, and it doesn't refer to any of the laws. What's interesting is, at least in the US state laws, having an ISO 42001 certification is listed as grounds for safe harbor. So if you're 42001 certified, there's going to be a presumption that you were trying to or did meet your obligations not to be reckless. As we look at the efforts to regulate AI on the federal level in the US, it's still early days. There's only leaks. We don't really have drafts yet publicly available. But from what I hear, the fundamental structure of a US federal law on AI might look very similar in structure to the EU AI Act. So product safety with risk tiering and penalties for non-compliance. And I find this fascinating because, again, you go back to the original ancestor, MDR, which was transplanted to AI, and now everyone around the world assumes that this is basically the correct way to regulate AI. And as an anecdote that maybe your audience might find a little bit amusing, I tracked some of the US state laws in early drafts as they were writing them. And it was so clear that they were cut and pasting from the AI Act that I caught, and I wish I'd saved this, and I foolishly didn't. I saw the draft of a state law in the US that talked about conformity. I was like, that's not a US legal concept. That's a European one.
Interesting. But Kevin, one thing I see here, actually, it has implication at the organization level. So what I mean by that is, in our world, let's say we talk about ISO 13485 and 14971, people in the quality regulatory departments, they live through that, but not, let's say, your business partners. But I think 42001 should be treated at the organizational level. And I know Raymond might have some ideas and thoughts on that, because this should inform policy, not just compliance to a specific regulation. Does that make sense to you?
Absolutely. 42001, it's a management system standard. And so it's very clear about what's expected from organizations. And that's actually what the auditors will look at. Do you have the right policies in place, and are they effective? And that's, of course, reflected, first of all, in organizational structures and processes, but is then also evidenced in who the AI systems that your organization builds, maintains, deploys. Do they meet what you're saying your organizational values, rules, and processes are?
Nice. And guys, I see this as an opportunity for us, because we are so used to working with, as I mentioned, these standards in our space. We should be working with our business partners and reaching out to them and say, how can we make 42,000 work within our overall framework, which is already so rock solid? Let's not do something different or redundant. And here's an opportunity that we can share our practices with you, learn from you what your operations are, so we can harmonize this. Great. Raymond is sharing another comment. If we consider that ISO 9001 is not adequate for MDR, I wonder if ISO 42001 might not be enough for the EU AI Act. Instead, I'm hearing a thought on this. How do you feel about that, Kevin? Is it too generic, not specific enough for it to be applied for the law?
This is a hornet's nest of questions that you're opening here, and I'll give a very short and generic answer. So no, ISO 42001 as it is will not guarantee you conformity with the EU AI Act. In my opinion, it's the best baseline technical standard you have today that you can adopt for the AI Act, but the harmonized standards from the EU for the AI Act have not been completed. They're not public yet. And it is an open question, and I'm happy to discuss this offline. It's an open question to what degree those may or may not be based on 42001.
Well, what I'm hearing you say that is that don't treat 42001 as a check the box. Don't treat this like, I've done it, now I'm good. Treat this as sort of framework in which you should operate. When it asks for responsible deployment, kind of be responsible, right? Okay, John is asking a question. Is there any chance of the IEC 61508 standard for functional safety committee to get involved with vertical standards for AI? Not sure if you're involved in that, Kevin, but can you comment on it?
I'm not, and I don't think I have any special insight on whether that's an option that people would consider.
No problem. I think this is one of the questions we can address, John, in some of our discussions in the future. Ed Bills, who has been involved with our 14971 risk management for, I believe, more than 20 years. He's sharing a very interesting information with us. Technical Committee for Risk Management is working on a guidance for machine learning that should be out nearly next year, if not sooner. It will apply to ISO 14971, and under overall residual risk and clause 8 requires us to include all risks from all sources, including AI. So thank you for sharing that, Ed. What I'm hearing you say that, hey, this framework exists already. We just need to be mindful of how to manage and document the AI-related risks for the product. Kevin, as you can see, our audience is very informed and very engaged. I love this conversation, guys. Thank you for sharing all this. So, Kevin, let's talk about from your perspective, how would companies should think about even responsible deployment? What does it involve? Is it a culture issue? Is it a technology issue? All of the above? How should we even begin to think about that?
It's all of the above. It's, of course, a culture question. It's a process question. There are very interesting technology questions, but there's also an aspect that I think a lot of organizations underestimate, and it's the fact that AI is a whole supply chain.
Kevin, I think you are breaking up a little bit, so we'll pause for just a moment, see if we can fix the sound. Can you test it again?
I'm testing 1, 2, 3.
Much better, much better. Yeah, please go ahead, continue.
So that organizations are part of a whole supply chain because we procure systems, we use models that we didn't train ourselves, and then we sell them on, and then other people might repackage them again. And so something to be very much aware of is that under the AI Act and other proposals for AI laws, when you take an AI model or an AI system and you then deploy it or alter it or reuse it or repurpose it, you assume a lot of the responsibility. I was at a discussion with some legal specialists in Europe, and under the EU AI Act, if you take an AI model and you fine-tune it, I don't know if your audience is familiar with that term, which basically means adapted using your data to your specific task. You now essentially take on all the responsibility that maybe the original provider of that model had. So, and then if you don't know exactly how that model was trained, you might be taking on all sorts of liability for things you didn't do yourself. So this is something to be aware of.
Yeah, let's put some detail on that, Kevin. If I understand you correctly, what you're saying is that let's say you got some generic LLM and you adapted it to your application. Am I thinking correctly about that? Is that what you mean?
That's exactly what I mean. So let's take a concrete example. You're making a medical device and you want to bring in some LLM to give the device AI capabilities. And you take a model, an open source model, maybe one of the Llama models from Meta, and you have your own data dealing with the medical condition that you work with, and you fine-tune the open source model so that it gives you better answers in the context of your medical device. You are now responsible for this model. You cannot then just go back and say, well, we took it from Meta and we made some changes, but if something happens, it's Meta's fault. No, you now own most of the responsibility.
Interesting. So you need to know exactly what the baseline model is. Is that going to be even possible for manufacturers to get that information?
That is a very interesting question. And there's going to be an interesting back and forth between the companies that train the models and the companies that want to use them in their own products. And I see a lot of unresolved questions and potential legal questions emerging that will have to be adjudicated in the courts. The law as written on this topic is very unclear.
Yeah. So it's a watch out. It's a watch out if we are fascinated by something fancy and we want to apply it. We have to be mindful that, hey, we're going to own the risk profile of the output. And I think that I want to highlight this for our audience that there are a lot of conversation about using Gen AI tools for quality management system improvement. For example, CAPA and design controls and whatnot, complaints handling. We have to be mindful that this will have to be validated inside our organization. So we'll have to own all that. Kevin, I know time flies. This is a fascinating conversation. We could potentially talk about this for hours, but I want to give you a couple of moments to reflect on our discussion today and maybe synthesize a few key points as takeaways. In the meantime, I'll share with you guys a couple of announcements. Next week is going to be another exciting conversation about deploying AI for proactive compliance in your quality management system. So this is what I just talked about. So we'll have a guest who has been working in this area and trying to develop solutions for responsible deployment for proactive QMS compliance and effectiveness. Please show up. The announcement has gone out. So you will find that on LinkedIn. Sign up, and that way you will get an alert. And I know many of you have reached out to me saying that we don't get these alerts. How do we know when an event is happening? The best way is to sign up for the Let's Talk Risk newsletter. That's my newsletter on Substack, because every Thursday I will actually I'll send you an email link to the LinkedIn event. Fortunately, guys, LinkedIn has made it very difficult, very, very difficult for me to communicate directly with you. And as a result, it's not really in my control. So I can share that link every Thursday with my newsletter subscribers. If you want to be part of the list, please join. And the second announcement I want to share with you is the next session of my post-market safety surveillance workshop is now scheduled for late August. It's a 4-hour workshop that will teach you some hands-on skills about managing post-market data and finding signals, but more importantly, creating a process, an operating process a business process that'll work for you. If you're interested in that, please reach out to me and I'll share with you the registration information. Kevin, with that, the floor is yours. Please share with us a couple of key takeaways.
So I talk to a lot of companies right now that are somewhere along the 5 stages of grief: anger, denial, bargaining, with regards to AI regulation, because they feel it's unfair, it's impossible, and it doesn't even apply to us because we're not using real AI. And I always found the folks from the medical device industry are much further along in this process, and they're not scared by it. All the things I mentioned. As an industry, I think you are far more capable and able to deal with this challenge, and I wouldn't be afraid of it. You know how to deal with it. The one thing I would add that I hear a lot, and that might be also a misconception in how you think about the problem, is that when people hear the word AI, our minds automatically go to the most modern Gen AI tools, to ChatGPT, to LLMs, to all the fantastic tools that are coming out every day. And the legal definition of AI has nothing to do with this intuition. The legal definition that's used in the EU AI Act, but that's also used in some of the US AI laws, is much broader. And there's a debate that it goes all the way to something as simple as a regression analysis in Excel being considered, quote, AI. Mm-hmm. And so as you look at your own products, right, don't say, the AI Act doesn't apply just because you haven't added an LLM yet. Think about and carefully study the definition of AI and think about whether it could apply to your own product.
I'm glad you mentioned that, Kevin, because this reminds me of how the thinking is evolving around cybersecurity from the FDA. I mean, I've read the guidance and they're saying if you have software in your device, you have to talk about cybersecurity. Yes, a lot of work to be done, but Kevin, it's so encouraging for us to hear from you that we are farther along in being ready, mentally ready. So it's up to us, guys, to do this, take a leadership role. Please give me feedback if you want to hear more about these topics, specific questions, and we can discuss that further in future conversations. Kevin, with that, I want to thank you once again for taking the time and sharing your wonderful insights. Guys, thank you to all of you for showing up week after week. This has been just an amazing journey with you for the last 2 years. And I know many of you show up week after week. So thank you for your engagement, your support. I just love this. With that, everybody have a good weekend ahead and we will connect once again next week. Kevin?